Hi, today we're going to be looking at the Guard lab from the App Development with Swift textbook. So let's get started. Imagine you want to write a function to calculate the area of a rectangle. However, if you pass a negative number into the function, you don't want it to calculate the negative area. Makes sense. Create a function called calculate area that takes two double parameters, x and y, and returns an optional double. Write a guard statement at the beginning of the function that verifies each of the parameter is greater than 0 and returns nil if not. When the guard has succeeded, calculate the area by multiplying x and y together. Then return the area. Call the function once with positive numbers and once with at least one negative number. All right, so let's have a look. This is really easy. So you go func, calculate area, and we're passing in two parameters, x of type double and y of type double. And we are also returning a double optional, and in here we're gonna put a guard statement here. So guard, I don't like Swift filling in this for me, so guard guard if x is greater than 0 and y is greater than 0. So if x is greater than 0 and y is greater than 0, else return nil, and otherwise return x times y. That's pretty much it, to be honest. So let me explain what I did here. This is a guard statement. Remember, guard statements execute if the statement here is false, right? So we're saying if guard is greater than 0 and y is greater than 0, then that statement's true. Then don't execute anything here, go straight here. Otherwise, if this statement's false, execute the body of the guard, which is return null. So let's go ahead and call this function up. So calculate area, and we're gonna put 2.4 and I don't know 3.9, and if we run this, we should get some sort of answer here. I'm gonna run it again with more easier numbers to calculate, and it works. Now we're gonna run it. Now we're gonna run it again, except here we're gonna put a -5 and a 2, and this should return nil. It returns nil because the guard essentially caught it. Okay, cool. That's pretty much it for that question. All right, moving on. Create a function called add. Create a function called add that takes two optional integers as parameters and returns an optional integer. You should use one guard statement to unwrap both optional parameters, okay, returning nil in the guard body if one or both of the parameters doesn't have a value. If both parameters can successfully be unwrapped, return their sum. Call the function once with non-nil numbers and once with at least one parameter being nil. So let's do this. So create a function called add. Okay, func add. That's pretty easy, and it's two optional integers. So x int optional and y of type int optional, and returns an optional integer. Okay, that's pretty easy. And we're gonna say guard. You should use guard statement to unwrap both optionals. All right, not too hard. So guard let my x equal x and let my y. Essentially, these are if let statements, or guard let statements rather, equal y. Else we're gonna return nil. Otherwise return their sum. Parameters doesn't have value. If both parameters can successfully be unwrapped, return their sum. So otherwise return my x plus my y. That's essentially it. So if I run this, this should work. Okay, so perfect. I haven't called up the function, that's why there's nothing, but there's no error, so that's good. So let me explain what I did here. It's a function, takes in an optional integer, an optional integer again, and returns an optional integer, and this is the guard. So you're familiar with if let statements. This is a guard let statement. It's essentially the same thing. I'm saying if there is something in x, put it in this variable that I just created, this constant I just created called my x. If there's something in y, put it in this variable, this constant called my y. Yeah, so essentially if there is not, the guard will succeed and return nil. Otherwise, go ahead and add them up, which returns the sum. That's essentially it. Let's add them. Call the function with non-nil numbers. Okay, so add right here. So non-nil numbers 4 and 9. It should work to 13. I hope it does. If I go add again, negative nil. Sorry. Let's try that again. Add. Gonna go nil and 14, for example, and I run. It should return nil just like it did here. Perfect. Awesome, because it couldn't unwrap x. All right, moving on. When working with UIKit objects, you will occasionally need to unwrap optionals to handle user input. For example, the text fields initialized below have text properties that are of type string optional. Okay, write a function below the given code called createUser that takes no parameters and returns an optional user object. Okay, write a guard statement at the beginning of the function that unwraps the values of each text field's text property and returns nil if not all values are successfully unwrapped. Got it. After the guard statement, use the unwrapped values to create and return an instance of user. So they've created the struct for us, user, and it's got 3 variables: first name, last name, age, and essentially there's text fields, right? Pretend that there's text fields in your app, and we're capturing the text fields in here. Okay, and the text fields have this: Jonathan, Sanders, and 28. So that's the text property of these text fields. All right, so let's go ahead and do what we're asked to do here. So we're gonna create a function called createUser that takes in no parameters. That's easy, and returns optional user object. So we're returning a user object that is optional. All right, so that's our function right here. That's our function signature. So for the body, write a guard statement. Okay, let's do this. Guard. Write a guard statement at the beginning of the function that unwraps the values of each text field text property. Okay, not too hard to do. Guard let, I'm gonna call it first name equals first name text field dot text. Let last name, I guess. Last name equals last name text field dot text. And let age equals age text field dot text. Else return nil, and if it doesn't return nil, what are we going to return? Write a guard statement at the beginning that unwraps. Okay, we did that. And returns nil if not all values successfully unwrap. We did that. After the guard statement, use the unwrap values to create a return instance of user. Okay, we could do that. So we're going to return user. Okay, we're going to return user object, and we're going to initialize it with first name. These are the variables that I just created. Okay, so let me explain what's happening here if you didn't follow. Essentially, we have a guard statement. We're saying, listen, look at the text fields here. Okay, look at the text fields. If you could unwrap all 3 text fields, okay, so if you could unwrap this text field and there's a value in it, place it in this constant that I just created called first name. If you could unwrap this text field, place the value in this constant that I just created called last name, and same thing with here. If you can't do any of that, return null. But if you can do it, go ahead and make an object and initialize it with first name, last name, age. Initialize it with this, this, and this. Cool? Pretty easy stuff. All right. Lastly, well, last thing on this page at least, call the function you made above and capture the return value. Unwrap the user with standard optional binding and print a statement using each of its properties. Okay, let me read that again. Call the function you made above and capture the return value. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to capture it in a constant let sum user equal create user. Okay, and that's that. Unwrap the user with standard optional binding and print a statement. Okay, so if let temp user, let's call it some user, and if that does work, there is something in some user. We're gonna print. What are we gonna print here? We're gonna print unwrap the user standard option and print a statement using each of its properties. So we're just gonna say temp user dot first name space temp user dot last name is temp user dot age old. Okay, let's go ahead and run this baby. Jonathan Sanders is 20 years old. 20 years old. Let's run it again. Not bad. All right, page 1 completed. So pretty easy stuff here. So I just a simple if let statement here. So I called this function and I captured the return in here called some user, and I just created a simple constant that captures the return here of this function, and then a simple if let that essentially checks that some user has data, right? And I put in temp user and I printed out the temp user properties, which are right here. Cool. All right, moving on to page 2. All right, page 2. In the exercise on optionals, you created a failable initializer for a workout struct that would only initialize a workout object if the start time and end time were farther apart than 10 seconds. You now create the same failable initializer only using a guard statement to check that the start and end times aren't too close together. Create a workout struct that has the property start time and end time of type double. Dates are difficult to work with, so you'll be using doubles to represent number of seconds since midnight. 28,800 would represent 28,800 seconds, which is exactly 8 hours. Okay, so I remember doing this in optionals. Write a failable initializer that takes parameters for the start and end time and then checks to see if they are greater than 10 seconds apart using guard statement. If they are, your initializer should fail, otherwise the initializer should set the property. Okay, so essentially we're redoing this from the previous chapter, except we're using a guard statement instead of an if statement. So struct workout. Okay, and we created our struct. We're gonna have two variables, var start time of type double and var end time of type double. All right, we've got our two variables here. We're gonna initialize it, and since this is a failable initializer, it's essentially an optional, and we're gonna say start time of type double and end time of type double, and that's our initializer, failable initializer. And in here we wrote an if statement before, so now we're going to do a guard statement. So guard end time is minus start time greater than 10, else return null, obviously. Okay, so this will return null. Otherwise initialize it with self dot start time equals start time, self dot end time equals end time. All right, that should work. Not sure why I'm getting an error. There we go, gone. Yes, it is gone. Perfect. All right, imagine a screen where a user inputs a meal that they've eaten. If the user taps save, the save button without adding any food, you might want to prompt the user that they haven't actually added anything. Okay, using the food struct and the text fields provided below, create a function called logFood that takes no parameters and returns an optional food object. Inside the object of the function, use a guard statement to unwrap the text property of food text field and calorie text field. In addition to unwrapping calories text field, you'll need to create and unwrap a new variable that initializes an int from the text in calorie text field. If any of this fails, return null after the guard statement. Create and return a food object. Okay, so that's a mouthful. That's a very big mouthful. Okay, so imagine a screen. Okay, so what do they want us to do here? So let me try to decipher here. Using the food struct and the text field, we'll create a function called log food. So let's go ahead and start with that. So func log food that takes no parameters, easy, and returns an optional food object. Okay, food object. Okay, awesome. Use the guard statement to unwrap the text properties of food text field and text field. Okay, okay, so that's, I know how to do that. Guard let I don't know, food name equal food text field dot text let calories text equals calories text field dot text, and let calories equals int calories. I'm not sure why it's not showing calories. No, I don't want that. I want calories text. That's fine. Just gonna type it as is. Else return no. Didn't give me an error, so that's good. So what I did there, just to explain to you here, and of course I have to put a return here, but that's fine. So essentially, in the guard statement, I'm unwrapping the text fields of this and this. So that's where I'm doing it here. I'm unwrapping it, and if there's something in here, if there's a value in here, I'm putting in food name. So if there's a value here, I'm putting in here. If there's a value here, I'm putting it in here. Cool, so that's what that is. This thing right here is, this is a string, so I need to convert that to a integer. So essentially I created something else called calories, and I'm taking this, right, and I'm converting to int, and I'm putting it in calories. Cool. And then otherwise, so text property, in addition to unwrapping, you'll need to create an unwrap new variable and initialize an int. And okay, I did that. If any of this fails, return null after the guard statement. Create or return food object. Okay, so how do we do that? We're gonna return food, right? Because we're returning a food object, and we're gonna initialize it with food name, and we're gonna initialize it with integer, which is calories. Boom. That should do it. Awesome. Okay, we're almost done here. Last thing here. Call the function you made above and capture the return value. So we're gonna capture this. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. If let my food equals log, was it not called log food? Function, yeah, called log food. Okay. Why is it not? Oh, there it is. Log food. Okay. So we're creating an object. We're capturing the return value, which is an object. We're capturing the return value of this function log food, which is an object of type food. So if let my food equals log food, and what does it say here? So call the function you made above and capture the return value. Unwrap the food object with standard optional binding and print a statement. So this is I am using optional optional binding here. I am unwrapping and using optional binding, and print a statement about the food using each of its properties. Okay, so print. Go back and change the text values. A string cannot be converted into a number. What happens in that case? Okay, one thing at a time. So I know what I'm doing here. So print. I'm gonna do print. The food is the following. We're gonna go my food dot name has. Let me just make the statement look nice. My food dot calories has this many calories. Let's go ahead and run this. And we've got an error here. Let's have a look. Not sure what's happening here. Apex note found this candidate let card. Yeah. Not sure what's happening here, to be honest. Oh, the playground could not continue running because the playground source could not compile successfully. Great. Okay, restart Xcode it is. Okay, so I restarted Xcode and everything worked fine. So didn't change anything, just Xcode, or rather playgrounds, kind of hang. The following banana has 23 calories. So I took my food.name, which is banana, the calories 23, and I just made a description sentence. That's all they wanted. Go back and change the text in calories text field to a string that cannot be converted into a number. What happens in that case? So let's have a look. So let's change this to something that cannot be converted. And let's go ahead and print this again. What happens here? Nothing. It doesn't print anything. Why? Because when we initialize this right here, we couldn't, when we try to unwrap it and convert it, when it didn't convert, it returned nil right here, and therefore nothing prints because this sucker right here is empty. So it returns nil. So we're essentially putting nil in my food, so nothing gets printed. If I go back and I change this to a number, as soon as I change that number and press play, it works. Perfect. That's pretty much it. Thank you for watching.